sessions, actually, we went back, some friends of mine, and we counted, coming up with 245 students, 74 classes, 64 hours of sitting in these seats in 13 days. Definitely not your normal summer camp. But through it all, we were able to learn how to trot out the toddler and really deal with the difficult issue of abortion, bringing those arguments down to one central debate. We learned how to classify and recognize the different worldviews. We learned how to engage our culture instead of simply ignoring or participating in it. We were taught how to communicate effectively and how to lead others. We learned not only the specifics, but we learned the history to show us where our government is headed. We learned how to deal with homosexuality, how to engage the culture by evangelizing everywhere we went, and so much more. But over all of the different things that we learned, we realized, as Mr. Stonestreet told us last night, we've gotten a ton of information. But information isn't good simply for information's sake. We are called to transform our culture. And as Mr. Stonestreet talked about a lot last night, that the information doesn't do us any good sitting on a shelf. We have to get up and we have to transform our culture. And what I've realized and really been hit with this week is that information isn't transformation. And many times transformation means getting out of our comfort zones. Today, our culture tells us, as we've learned in the past 2 weeks, that your comfort zone is the most important thing to you. What you think, what you believe, and what you feel like you need to do. However, as Christians, we are called to transform our culture by going beyond our comfort zone. Being a Christian in today's world means that you have to get uncomfortable. For many of us, we learned in the past 2 weeks that wrestling with ideas and really thinking is uncomfortable. That getting up on stage and speaking is uncomfortable. That evangelizing just in a park or downtown is uncomfortable. And yet we have been called to get out of our comfort zones. I was thinking about some examples of this, and when we look at Abraham, he was called to leave everything behind and to go somewhere that he didn't even know where he would end up. Moses said that he wasn't good with words and was scared to death to speak, yet he was called to speak to Pharaoh, at the time the most powerful man in the world. Esther and Abigail, two of my favorites, were called to face almost certain death to follow God's will. Gideon, as we talked about in these last couple of weeks, said himself that he was the weakest man, yet God told him to lead an army against all odds. Dr. Moffat, as we heard from, is called to go out of his comfort zone facing death threats because he is willing to speak up. Mrs. Brazina is willing to go out of her comfort zone and to let others verbally abuse her because she is willing to take a stand on the issues. Dr. Myers told us stories about how he was willing to take ridicule and questions from professors because he was willing to go out of his comfort zone. Mr. Haley told us about an entire community turning their back on him because he too was willing to take a stand for his biblical worldview. We have to realize that this information isn't going to transform our culture. That God has called each and every one of us to go outside of our comfort zones to do His will. This really hit me hard, and one of my favorite verses has really come to light. That's Esther 4:14. Where we see, yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. It's been shown to us time over the past 2 weeks that we have been brought to this kingdom for this time, but that this time many times means we are going to be uncomfortable. But as a Christian, we have been given the honor and the blessing that God has chosen us to be the uncomfortable ones. We've been given a huge responsibility, but it's not just a responsibility. God has chosen us to be a part of His story. That really hit me hard over the last 2 weeks, and I am so glad. And I know that I have decided, as I hope you have as well, that with everything that we've learned, information isn't transformation. But instead, that transformation comes from realizing that the honor and the blessing that we have been given is definitely worth being uncomfortable, and that we will all go home ready to realize that being comfortable is simply not what we're called to do.